Hello and welcome. Here is a quick one about graphics performance and how I actually now managed to optimize my graphics settings much more than it was at the beginning. The vital clues I got from people like Q8 Pilot, who showed their graphics settings and made me aware of the impact that some settings actually do have on performance, which went a bit further than the information on the forum page that I got. And I think I've now managed to get this simulator to perform consistently and relatively smooth. As you can see, on 60 frames per second. I'm not going to keep it at 60 frames per second, but I wanted to show you that the graphics settings are basically capable now of sustaining 60 frames per second, at least with the Cessna in this current environment. But when I put this on 30 frames per second, which is fine for video recording, I also can see that the general use of my resources, the CPU, the GPU, they go down by about 20%. That means there's less strain on the hardware. There's not so much air that has to be blown into the room, hot air. And it still produces the same picture, just with 30 frames per second, which is fine, which is for the visual appearance, especially on the screen, is more than enough. You do not need 60 frames per second. Usually, at least I don't. That's my personal way. And now I'm going to show you my current settings and what I have changed and what impact that has. Actually, the main one, the one that really made a big difference initially was this render scaling. I haven't quite understood what render scaling does. And the problem here is the descriptions that they have with these things, they're not always clear, okay? And when you have this frame per second thing, you even can't read everything, you know. So I kind of misinterpreted what render scaling is at the beginning. And while I was playing around with the settings, I kind of tweaked it up and down, and then the picture got it differed, but the use on the GPU especially was higher and higher. I realized sometimes in the last 2 days, I realized that there were 3 values here. It's hard to read. I'm sorry about that, but it says 1920 by 1080. This is the resolution of my screen, right? Sync. So the screen has 1920 by 1080 resolution. The game, I saw that it was something like 4K. So it basically had something like 4K put in. And I thought, why is the game playing 4K? And then it's post 1920 by 1080. Post is post-processing. In other words, it was, and that's where scaling comes from, and I should have really picked up on that earlier. It basically rendered the game in 4K, and then it down-rendered it to 1920. And that took a lot of resources off the graphic card. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I didn't pick up on this is whenever I have this screen open, I usually also have the frame rate, and I couldn't just read it properly. And therefore, I didn't pick up on it immediately. But I was wondering about those values when I discovered them up here. Now I put it on 100. 100 probably means 100%. And yeah, now we have 3 times the same values. And what can I tell you? That definitely brought down the use of the graphic card and the CPU. Definitely, because it didn't have to work as hard to get the picture. And there is actually no benefit. I tried, I put it on full, apart from being slow. I also realized there isn't really that much difference. It's not that this is a benefit if you do that. On the contrary, it actually eats performance. So you should leave this probably on 100%. which means that hopefully it will then show you the... Well, you have to check, yeah, okay, so put this probably on 100. If your screen has a particular resolution, make sure that whatever you set here on the render scaling brings the game to the same resolution as your screen. And that will be much better if it doesn't have to do down or up scaling. The anti-aliasing, this is the highest setting, and no other setting will work for me. They look even more awful. But even with TAA, which is the temporal anti-aliasing, provides the highest quality bullshit, it's still flickering lines, and it will not go away. And I think I have an explanation, at least my theory is, this game was made for higher resolution screens and devices. So I'm running on a 1K sort of resolution. It's is it 1K even? I'm not even sure of that. It's the lowest probably nowadays in screens. I don't think many people have, apart from older screens, have screens that have a lower resolution than the 1920 by 1080. And I think the game was made for higher resolutions, 4K and the likes. And when you have such a high resolution, anti-aliasing is not your problem, because these little stairs in the lines, they get so small, and together with this temporal anti-aliasing, I'm pretty sure on a 4K screen, this would probably look fine. This would look what we see in many of those 4K videos, and that's no crookedy lines. Unfortunately, it seems that in my case, it's not enough. So we see a lot of stairs. For example, the digital displays are unreadable. I've had this in one of my test streams in the citation, in the smaller citation. The displays are completely useless. What I found out in the meantime is you can actually pull them out, but I didn't know how to do that, or if that is possible when I was trying it out. So that's at least some help and makes it possible to actually use these displays. But yeah, the anti-aliasing is not sufficient for this resolution. It's crap, actually. But I think this is probably an optimization that says most people nowadays will run this on devices that have a higher resolution. Therefore, you do not need to put in so much energy into anti-aliasing things, because due to the resolution, this is a much smaller factor on your picture. So I will probably have to live with crookedy lines while I'm still on the old resolution. I can't stream 4K, and I don't want to invest in a 4K screen if I don't really need it. So I will have to live with it. That's at least what I think is the case. The terrain level of detail, I actually realized that putting this up and down doesn't really cause that much strain. So I've already vamped it up a little bit. I will be playing with this just to see how far can I bring it up. I just haven't done this yet. Terrain vector data I meanwhile put on ultra. I had it on high for some time. Didn't really make a big difference. Buildings and trees I have on high because actually, you know what? Let's see. I put them on ultra because now that I have less strain on the system, I might actually be able to run with the ultra setting here. Object level of detail is 100. I think it looks great the way we have it at the moment. And it seems to perform well. Volumetric Clouds, actually that I wanted to test. I'm going to set this to ultra. And Anisotropic Filtering, I put this on the highest level. Texture super sampling. Yeah, this is something that will affect your performance a little bit. But the thing is, I haven't really seen a lot of difference between the settings. So what you can play around with is that you set this up. So I have this now on 2. Maybe I put this back on 6. Let's see. See that? Interesting. Put this back on 2. It does have quite an impact. So performance-wise, this is expensive, the super sampling stuff. And I'm yet to figure out if this really has an impact on my performance. Texture synthesis is ultra. There's no, I couldn't see any big difference. Water waves, high. Shadow maps, well, if you cast shadows, I use the highest quality. Terrain shadows I have, but just on a low resolution. Contact shadows ultra, because everything that is on contact, it's awful if it looks crookedy. Windshield effects I put up actually high. Ambient occlusion, I turned this off because this has also an impact, and that's what I got from Q8 Pilot. Ambient occlusion doesn't seem to make a big difference to me visually, at least not when I tested it. And turning it off actually gave it a bit less strain on the system again, and therefore, yeah. The bloom I turned off. Light shafts high, depth of field high, and all these lens flare and lens correction and stuff like that. And AI I've turned off completely. So let's apply this. As you can see, we're still on 60. Now let's see what happens when we're in the simulator. And that is a completely different picture. So what I can tell you now is my CPU is on 43 to 62 at the moment. So I'm going to change a little bit the views. It is quite smooth. And when I go into the outside view, yeah, the only thing you can see is that on the aircraft you can see crookedy lines. I'm not able to get rid of that. Whatever I tried, it's not possible to get rid of it. That's just a fact of life now. But with the more buildings and the more trees and so on, things look even a bit better. Now we are at 50% CPU and 66% GPU plus OBS plus, so we were 70% of the CPU and 55% of the GPU, and then 56% to 60% of the CPU all in all with all the other things. That is actually quite good, and I can hear that my very loud, unfortunately very loud water cooler runs on a nominal sort of good RPM. And I have to say, this is a very good compromise. But now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you, is I leave all of that, and the only thing I change back is I go to 30 frames per second, I say apply, and I'm down now at 40% GPU and 40% CPU, and I'm pretty sure you don't see any difference in the picture, because the picture itself hasn't changed. It's just a number of frames that it renders during the same time is lower. And where you can see this is if we go into the cockpit, and if I turn in the cockpit, you may see a little bit more tearing effect, sort of, yeah, it's not as totally smooth as it was at 60 frames per second, yes. But I think this is actually quite good. Now, there's one other settings. Let me quickly bring this airplane up a bit. That you can play with if you don't want to limit your frames, if you want to have the maximum possible. For that, you need to turn off VSync. And when you do that, what it does is it pulls your well, it actually allows you to run with the maximum frames, okay? And the maximum frames that this system seems to be able to produce is 88, 90, yeah, and it's really extremely smooth. The problem now is My CPU is at 67, 70%. That would still be okay. My GPU is maxed out, and I'm pretty sure that you can see some tearing and problems now that I don't see on my screen, because the GPU is at 100% together with OBS and the rest. And that is not a good thing for me and for you, because it will cause issues with streaming and issues with the video recording. So just wanted to show you the system as it is set up now can actually run with 88 to 90 frames, but you need to turn VSync off. That's not something that doesn't make a difference, you know. I still have flickering lines. The rest looks exactly the same. So why should I put such a strain on my system unnecessarily without having really any discernible effect? So I'm putting this back on, and we can already probably hear my fans as well. They are coming down now. We're back at about 40% all in all GPU and 40% CPU. That is a nice thing with these type of aircraft and this type of scenery. It looks better than anything I had in X-Plane, definitely, and prepared anyway. And I'm happy. I'm actually happy, apart from the anti-aliasing on the crookedy lines. I'm really happy now with the result, and that is the way now I'm going to leave my settings for the moment. Okay, that's it. Until next time.